Out of my warm, diamond-encrusted hands. I'm Scott Ott with Stephen Green and Bill Whittle, and this episode of Right Angles brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, on this episode, we take a look at something that's been near and dear to all three of our hearts over the years, and that is the National Rifle Association coming under attack, not just from Democrats, as they're used to, but from people who are part of the organization. 4 board members, at least, perhaps 5, have left in recent weeks following the departure of chairman of the board, Oliver North. And all of this surrounds basically the lifestyles of the rich and famous. It's organizational leader Wayne LaPierre's habit of spending lots of money on travel, spending lots of money on clothing, and recently the organization found itself trying to defend the expenditure of $5 or $6 million on a mansion for Mr. LaPierre, the longtime NRA leader. Bill Whittle, I know that in the past you have done some contract work for an organization that did some contract work for the NRA.
Right.
This is an awkward situation at best, because here's this organization that's talking about something that we believe in, and yet they're doing it in a way that apparently doing it in a way that we don't believe in.
Yeah, and I just would like to stress as clearly as possible, these are just my personal comments. I no longer represent the NRA in any way. But I do remember when I was working there a couple years ago, it seemed like Wayne LaPierre was going to be out like any week now, and that new management was going to take over. And I got a chance to talk to some of the people who looked like they'd be moving up, and they seemed really fresh and had some good ideas. And like I say, that's 2 or 3 years later. You cannot run a nonprofit organization and have a $5 million house. I'm not saying it can't be done. He's obviously done it. And I'm not even saying he doesn't deserve it. I'm just saying that you can't do it. The optics are terrible. And, people kind of sneer at this term optics like it's some kind of fake thing, like, just kind of window dressing. No, optics really means this just looks bad. And it does look bad. And I know that if you're a dues-paying member of the National Rifle Association, you'd like to think that your money was going to things like, congressional influence and safety programs and all the rest of it, not to a $5 million house. That's a lot of membership money, a lot. So I just think it's really time for him to go, and past time for him to go. He's done an amazing job with it. It has become not only the defender of our Second Amendment rights, but lately it's become one of the prime defenders of our First Amendment rights. And so I think it's time for Wayne to basically, gather up his laurels and retiring in glory, which is fading fast, and like so many other people who become so identified with what they do, it's very, very easy to hang on longer than you should. And how many times have we seen this with Brett Favre and Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan and all the rest? It's like you go out on top. Do what Jerry Seinfeld had the genuine guts and genius to do. You go out at the top of your game. You close the show when it's #1 in the country. I don't think anyone's ever done that before. But that's how you maintain a legacy and a reputation. You do the best work you can for that organization, and once you become aware that either your powers are failing or your ability to be in touch with what's going on is starting to weaken, then you hand it off to somebody new, and you retire in genuine glory. And I think we're well past that point for Mr. LaPierre, and I suspect that just as the nature of human beings, the more pressure he comes under to leave, the more determined he's going to be to stay.
Now, Stephen Green, in the past, I've seen defenders of Mr. LaPierre make arguments like, first of all, he's got to travel by private jet because he's such a high-profile and controversial figure that he needs to have the security that private jet flight affords him that he couldn't enjoy on a commercial airliner, and that makes some sense. He's also made the argument that he has to dress the way he does, and so he's spent quite a lot of money has been spent on his wardrobe because of the kind of work he does, and by the same token, he needs to have sort of an elevated lifestyle because of the people from whom he is requesting large contributions. Essentially, he's got to be one of the rich in order to solicit the rich. Steve, what's wrong with that argument? And what's the best way to explain that to those little Humpties who are given $25 a year to be members of the NRA?
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? The NRA started off as much more of a grassroots organization. It wasn't about getting big checks from millionaires and billionaires. It was about earning that $25 a year from grassroots people for whom $25 a year might be a fairly significant investment. If I'm looking at my hunting trip and thinking, well, I can spend $25 on some ammo, or I can send a check of $25 to Wayne LaPierre and the NRA, and you're actually having to think about this, that is the core of your organization. If you are a civil rights group, the secret to your success has got to be in sheer numbers. I was a member of the NRA for exactly 1 year back, and I want to say it was 2012 or 2013. It was whatever year that previous president of ours, I don't even like saying his name that much anymore, pretty much declared war on the NRA. And I remember this quite clearly. I was sitting on the sofa with my wife, Melissa, and I just shook my head and I said, that's the last straw. The NRA needs numbers and more of them. And I opened up a web browser, I had my laptop there on the sofa, and I became a member. And my wife did the exact same thing. She pulled out her little MacBook, and the two of us joined the NRA that night. And there is a strength in numbers for a civil rights organization. Let's be very clear: the Second Amendment is a civil right, and it needs to be defended as such. And if you want to suck up the big checks from millionaires and billionaires, that's fine. But maybe you need a separate organization for that kind of thing. The NRA, that is all about guys, men and women, defending their own rights through a national organization, and you need numbers. And by the time you're living in a $5 million house, well, let's call it a mansion, because I don't think you can spend $5 million on a mere house. You give it the title it deserves. Call it a mansion, an estate, or whatever the proper word is. A mere house or domicile doesn't quite cover that. By the time you're doing that, I think you've really lost touch with the guys who are sending you $25 a year, and it's time to go.
Yep.
I just add one thing, Scott. It's just been in the nature so much of fundraising, really become almost de rigueur for over the last 5 to 10 years, to say that this is an emergency and we need your help now. This is how the fundraising appeals go out to the little guys. And it's kind of tough to make the case that we need emergency funds now when there's a $5 million mansion that's being paid for. That, to me, implies that they've got more money than they know what to do with. If they can afford to pay Wayne LaPierre that much money, how badly do they need this, $25 for me? And that's, I think, the main reason with the optics.
Yeah, and I'm not saying pay the guy minimum wage or $50K a year. It's an executive position. Pay him like an executive of a large organization. But a $5 million mansion out of membership dues and billionaires' big checks, that's not right.
That's what you move into after you retire.
Yeah.
And you write a book and go on a speaking circuit when you're not actually picking the pockets of the members of your organization. The conservatives in particular, but humanity in general, tends to fall into a couple of traps. And one of those is the lionizing or the worship of other human beings. When somebody has some accomplishments under their belt, then we tend to see them in as if they were greater than just an ordinary human being. If I went in to run that organization today, there's no way I'd have the kind of autonomy with which Mr. LaPierre has been able to navigate the halls of power. There's no way that I could walk up to anybody and say, hey, I need a $5 million house and I want to fly on a private jet and be picked up by a limousine and do it, all of those things, people would say, well, who in the world do you think you are? And so this kind of thing doesn't happen overnight. It wasn't day one at NRA for Wayne LaPierre. Little by little, the people who are overseeing his work, the board of directors, and by the way, I lay this squarely at the doorstep of the board of directors. They are responsible to that organization, and if they let the leader of that organization run amok like this, it's their fault, and it's a good thing that some of them are leaving. The ones that are leaving, I think, are doing so out of a sense of principle, but they should be leaving as kind of falling on their own sword and saying, you know what, I have failed you as a board member because I allowed this to happen on my watch. But the other factor is not just the worship of humanity or of men, but the other thing is that conservatives in particular tend to be those who are eager to espouse principles, but horrible at putting in place processes to carry out those principles. And so this happens in all kinds of realms, whether you hear conservatives standing up and moralizing about things, and then when it gets right down to it, they have no idea how to pass the bill. They have no idea how to govern, and they don't even have a plan to govern. They just think that it's good enough that if you stand up in front of your constituents and proclaim that I believe that is sufficient. But it's not sufficient. There is a thing called governance, and frankly, the NRA is involved as part of that process of governance as a lobbying group, and they don't even have the ability to govern themselves. Now, lest you think that it's only the NRA that has this kind of problem, I would invite you to look at the nonprofit organization that you're a part of right now. I would invite you to look at your own church or synagogue and say, have we granted the leaders of this organization power without oversight? Have we given them authority without responsibility or without a system of checks and balances? I once went to a church who was going to hire a friend of mine, and I had a private moment with the head pastor. And while this friend was out of the room, and I said, let me ask you a question. Who can say no to you? And he looked shocked for a moment. He said, well, anybody on my board of deacons can say no to me. We later found out that no, nobody was capable of saying no to him. And that's what happened with Wayne LaPierre. And it's not just with Wayne LaPierre. I seriously think you should look at a story like this and go, okay, where's this happening in my life? Because I can't control what the NRA does, but maybe I can have some influence in the organization that I'm a part of. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.